Welcome to episode number 18 of the My Story Podcast. The My Story Podcast features interviews with leaders, influencers, and entrepreneurs who tell their story and the life lessons they've learned along the way. Hi, I'm Conrad Weaver, your host for the show. We're in season 2 and looking forward to bringing you more interviews with amazing people doing great things. So have you ever wanted to know what really goes on in Hollywood and like how the movie business works? Well, today's guest will help shed some light on that. Michael Sajbel is a screenwriter, film director, and producer who's worked in the business for a long time. He's worked on a number of major films like Men of Honor, Hunt for Red October, and many, many others. He's also directed a number of films for the Billy Graham Association. And last summer, I was able to connect with him and record an interview with him from his home in Wisconsin. He tells us the story of his journey in the business of making movies. So stay tuned. You know, I'm really excited about the new season of the podcast. I've got some amazing people on the program in the next few weeks, and I think you'll enjoy every one of them. And I'm always looking for new connections with leaders, influencers, and entrepreneurs. And so if you know of someone you think would be a good fit for the show, I would love it if you'd make an introduction. Hey, if you enjoy these podcasts and think that more people should listen, give me a review on Apple Podcasts. Then share this episode with a friend. You can send it through a text message or an email or through a Facebook post and share it with all your friends. I would be so excited for you to do that. I'm also very excited that the My Story Podcast is now also available on Stitcher. If you're listening on the Stitcher app, please give me a shout out, leave a review, let me know that you're tuning in. Thanks for doing that. And now, here's my interview with Michael Sajbel. So Michael, welcome to the My Story Podcast. I'm so glad you were able to join me today.
Thank you, Conrad.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about who you are and what do you do?
Well, I am, I would say at the midpoint of my career as a film writer, director, and occasional producer. I produce when I can't find another producer. And I have started off in the business right out of UCLA as a film writer. I was on the set of my first professionally written, produced feature film when I was about 22, I think. And there's an entire story behind that, of course. And then I ran into a couple of guys on a couple of film sets, and they said, "Hey, we should start a production company," because everybody has a production company. So we did, and we started doing miniatures and special effects and explosions for TV shows. And we did, Fall Guy, Airwolf, Dukes of Hazzard, and Knight Rider, and Murder, She Wrote, and all of those shows in the 80s. Needed us and used us, and we were.
Wow, I love some of those shows. Yeah, I remember Airwolf especially. That was one of my favorites.
Well, I worked on from the pilot to a couple of the episodes, even when they went up to Canada for the 4th season. And then that sort of lent itself to feature film work. And by then my company had reformed, got rid of some bad blood, or bad blood left us on its own accord, you might say. And which was great. And so my partners and I then started sharing in the profits. So then we experienced the fruits of Hollywood and worked on parts of almost, 40 to 50 feature films. Probably the most fun ones were Hot Shots and Hot Shots Part 2. But we did Speed, Broken Arrow, Hunt for Red October. A number of Disney films, a lot of 20th Century Fox films, X-Men. So we really were working quite a bit. In fact, one year we had I'm missing a decimal point, 200 days of filming
Wow.
And you add in prep days and holidays, we worked every day. And including Easter Sunday morning, I was shooting motocross, believe it or not. But
Hmm.
so I always looked at that as kind of a journeyman job. That wasn't really my aim, but we sure put a lot of money in the bank, and I was able to buy a house and right under the H in the Hollywood sign. And then got more into feature work and started working on some independent features where I was the writer or director. And then I ran into friends or people who would become friends in some of the faith-based filmmaking. I wrote or directed or produced a combination of two usually, a number of Billy Graham movies in the 1990s. And I was also doing the studio work still because you can't make any money, or at least I don't think you can make any money off of faith-based films. So then just the last 10 or 12 years, I've been directing mainline feature films for the theaters. Probably my most recognizable film is called The Ultimate Gift. And I had a lot to do with that film. I would say more than any other film, and to date, I should say. And then that was in the 2005, I think, time slot. And I'd done a film in India the year before with Omar Sharif and Peter O'Toole and John Rhys-Davies called One Night with a King. But when I did The Ultimate Gift, I was able to really work with the producers for casting and get really a lot of my casting requests fulfilled, including James Garner. And it turns out to be Mr. Garner's last film. And let's see, a number of great other actors. Brian Dennehy, who I always had on my bucket list to work with, was in that film. And so, yeah, it was really a film that it did horribly in the box office, but it was a phenomenal success in DVD and aftermarket. And it kind of launched the Hallmark Channel and their Christmas movie craze, because it was just clean enough and not edgy enough to satisfy their audience.
And boy, their whole thing is taken off with the Christmas movies.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw they were releasing 30 or 40 titles this year. And I was like, wow, that's crazy.
Well, the first couple of years, Hallmark Channel showed The Ultimate Gift either, back to back for 2 weeks, or they showed it. It was their feature film, and they showed other films every other, like a checkerboard type pattern. But we were on 3-4 times a day, and
wow,
it really did build that channel and their recognition. And of course, I think they felt like they hit pay dirt with the theme of Christmas.
Yeah. So over the years, what have you seen? What's some of the biggest changes you've seen in Hollywood or in the movie business?
Well, I've kind of tracked the business itself from the very beginning, from the Lumiere brothers, the Pathé brothers, all of the late 1800 French filmmakers who were experimenting with just taking a movie of a chimney falling or a train pulling into a station, a kid eating spaghetti, that type of thing. And then into the silent era, and of course, in America with Cecil B. DeMille and others, and obviously D.W. Griffith, the Gishes, and Silence, and obviously Chaplin, and Keaton, and then obviously into the late 20s and the early 30s, where the sound started, and then the movies always were trying to improve with color, and then widescreen, better sound, and finally evolving into better seating at the theaters. But the one of the biggest revolutions ever was being able to see your films in a secondary market. I mean, you could see a movie at a theater, then you could see it on a double bill in a discount theater, but ultimately, or second run theater, and but ultimately, by 1981, video, either VHS or Betamax or Beta, I guess, Betacam, that had equaled box office earnings in as early as 1981. So that was the beginning of what I think is where we are now, where there are more markets than just the theater. And as the cost of making movies escalate, the audience seems to decline. And fortunately, we have still a number of theaters in the U.S., and it's still a viewing habit. But it's nothing like in the 1930s and 40s when people went like once a week or twice a month. And so now you've got
It was a social gathering place, right? It was a place where you went with your friends and family to get out on the town, right?
It's where I went with my friends to find girls and make out in the balcony. And, the town I grew up in, Wausau, Wisconsin, does not have a movie theater today. I mean, there's one in the outer, what you'd call a suburb or whatever, but it's so now my kids are upstairs, not this minute, I hope. I think they're probably still asleep because it's summer and they work later jobs, but they're watching everything on their MacBook Pros, their iPads, and even their iPhones. And streaming is king. The DVD is, if it's not dead already, it will be. Now, I still have an audience for my latest film on DVD, but we're not taking up any shelf space. So although we're at Walmart.com, Target.com, Amazon.com, of course, there's not a hard copy of my film on a shelf anywhere. And that would be Wraith, the last movie I did.
Yeah. Do you think that whole transition from, the community gathering in the theater, watching something together in a dark room, to being alone in your room or with your family has really maybe changed the theater experience or the movie experience in some way that is a negative?
Well, I mean, I was just reading this. Oh gosh, I'd say it was a blog of sorts or an article online where they brought together a lot of thinkers, including J.J. Abrams and other people. And now when you're doing a shot, this is just addressing one aspect of your question. When they look at a shot now on a monitor and they're filming, they're going, will people be able to see that on their iPhone? And so there's now a consideration. I don't know if you're going to get the big, wide, Lawrence of Arabia type shots anymore with these, with the modern audience. That's one thing. Plus, what I'm sort of discovering is very possibly, although you're being robbed of a communal experience, and certainly there's nothing like a full theater for watching horror. Now, you can argue that in my home theater, me watching a horror film on my own is more scary, but at the same time, there's nothing like a communal scream or a shriek or a gasp. And, it's just, I believe it has changed the viewing experience. And also they're on a different level, and I don't know if they've fixed this or not, but when you saw a film projected, you were in a theater and half the time was dark because of, image retention and flashing on the screen 24 times a second. But you were still in the dark, but your eyes got used to that and your brain got used to that, and you filled in the blanks and with retention and all that. Well, now with video streaming, it's just a constant beam of light into your brain. So I think people are even going to have a different physiological response to material.
That's interesting.
And unless they built in, some sort of a pulse or whatever. And now these new TVs that you buy at like Costco and all that, the Vizios and everything, you have to go in and program out that streaming feature that, what do they call it? It's dampening or whatever. It's meant for sports, but it makes all movies look like bad wedding videos. And so you need to deprogram your brand new TV to even get remotely a cinematic experience. So there's a number of different levels of change watching a smaller screen with a constant beam of light and alone versus a flickering image in a theater with a crowd.
Mm-hmm. I know here locally, this one company bought up an old theater, and they're transforming it into kind of a dinner place where you can get a beer, you can get some food, and the chairs recline, and it's becoming a whole. They're having to look at new ways of attracting customers. Similar to what if I go to my house, I'm comfortable, I'm sitting in my pajamas and sitting on my easy chair, and I can have a beer in my hand or whatever. So they're kind of recreating that in some of the theaters to bring people back out to those communal gatherings.
Yeah, my wife and I just saw Amazing Grace, the documentary on Aretha Franklin, in a church in South Central Los Angeles in the 70s, and it was quite a documentary. I think it was perhaps poorly timed because I think it could get Academy consideration. If it didn't, I'm not sure. And it was in a landmark theater in West Los Angeles where there are couches and drinks, and now nobody's coming in and asking to take your order in the middle of the movie, but you could walk anything in you wanted, and there were couches, not seats. And yeah, I like that experience. It's any experience where you can still see smaller movies and independent films and significant documentaries and things like that. I'm all for that because I still love the big screen. Even my screen at my home theater is at least 12 feet. It's a projection, so it comes down out of the ceiling and all that funny stuff. But yeah, I mean, anything smaller, I just don't appreciate as much, I don't think.
Mm-hmm. So where do you think the industry is headed? I mean, where's it going to be in 10 years?
Well, I'm not a prophet as much as a reader of information and tea leaves, I guess. You're going to have these continuous big superhero. I mean, how many Marvel movies are there now? And they all make, $1 billion. And if one only makes 600 million, they think it's an abject failure.
It's a failure.
You'll never see a bad guy again who's Chinese. It's all, so that it's an event. It's like, almost like an IMAX type event. I'm, not sure if every big movie is now coming out in 3D again or not. But they certainly are more like, going to a carnival and being strapped in. And I don't know where virtual reality is going, where you put on a mask and you're in a room, but a combination of that. Like I did go on the rides in Orlando for the Harry Potter, where you are in a 3D situation plus articulated chair and all that, and it's phenomenal. I mean, just utterly entertaining with a 2-hour wait, So I don't know,
or what a 2-minute ride or something.
Yeah, but wow, thrilling. It's just basically, will simple stories still be told at a theater, and then of course the theaters have to do their part. My last film released in theaters locally in Wisconsin, where we shot it, about almost 2 years ago. And I got the statement from the theater on the earnings. The earnings were fantastic. We were held over. Well, we were in the theater 6 weeks, and they were digitally now. If so many people show up, they just knock a movie out of a theater and add a second theater. I mean, it's really fantastic that way. But the printout said, okay, this is many senior discounts. This was the Taco Tuesday discount. This was the matinee discount. And I go, did anybody pay full price to see this movie? So, but, they have to do their part. And of course, they make in excess of 90% profit on popcorn and soda and what have you.
Right.
And, but yeah, so it's all evolving. And I don't know what the next iteration is other than, you walk into a Costco again, and the first thing you see are these incredibly brilliant, beautiful, large screen TVs that are just crashing in price. And every other shopping cart going out the door has got one on it. And so, and of course, in a larger city, you have to pay for parking as well. And of course, then if you have a babysitter, it's just, I think it's going to be large event films in the theaters, films that require really great noise, like, Fast and Furious. And
you want that 7.1 surround sound.
Oh yeah,
that gives you the full immersive experience.
And I want it loud.
Right.
And that's another evolution, by the way, is that starting with the transformation over to digital projection instead of movie projectors, there's now a third party involved out of New York, and you pay them, and they put the equipment into the theaters, including the sound, and you pay them separately. So basically, the theater, you're renting the room, and the film and the equipment. As a filmmaker and this distributor is paying them extra. It's very funny. So it's they found a way to divide it up even more.
So for those who are not in the movie business and don't understand the business behind it, when a Marvel movie says they made $1 billion, really how much of that is actual profit? I mean, there's not that much profit in these movies.
Well, I'm constantly looking for money for 2 or 3, 4 projects. I'm sure you are as well. And I just did a film for approximately $600,000. And if you do the math, that's 20 investors for $25,000 each. And I went into what you'd call deferred compensation on some of the talent and myself, and to the tune of almost 100,000. So that adds up to about 600,000. And knowing that we weren't going to get a national theatrical run unless we were some phenomenally unusual film. And that's certainly what I would advise anyone to aim for. But virtually anyone who invests in a film, even at the $25,000 level, is knows somebody who's invested in a movie and has lost money. So there's really not, and if you, of course you live in Los Angeles, I don't know what it's like in other parts of the country, but LA certainly was the movie capital. And certainly there's a lot of stuff that's still done there. My trailer was cut there. My sound was mixed there. My sound was composed there. My music, my digital, my grading, color grading, which some people used to call color timing, was all done there. And my final printing, all that was still done in Hollywood. But there are other places to do it. I finished a film once in Toronto. They were very capable up there as well. Finding money to make a movie in Los Angeles, unless it's a big studio film or a small independent where people work on it a couple of years, I always say to people, like if I talk to film students, I say your first budget and your first feature is going to be funded by someone you know. It's going to be your aunt, your uncle, your grandpa, your kids, your paper route, who knows? But it's the rich guy that you know down the block or a group of people. But everyone knows, unfortunately, the business, and this is the part I was going to refer to about Los Angeles. The LA Times, the Hollywood Reporter, everybody's constantly suing and being sued because they're not dividing up the profits. Everybody knows about the famous Hollywood accounting, that every minute a film is out, the studio is charging interest on the money that they used to make the movie. So when, like, say, for instance, one of the Harry Potter films came out, I believe it's Warner Brothers, charged the movie $53 million in interest. And I'm pretty sure that's the amount. If it's not, it was fairly outrageous. So the famous Coming to America lawsuit, where the author, Art Buchwald, was promised a piece of the action off the back end. And the film had made, well over $500 million. and they still said it lost money. But the old rule of thumb used to be that the film has to make about 3.3 times its budget to reach profitability, where non-equity investors, which are, directors, writers, producers, actors, and maybe an author of the original material, non-equity investors would start making their money. And there are plenty of big houses in the Hollywood Hills, where I like to golf. Lionel Richie has a mansion on this golf course that is as big as you've ever seen. I mean, it's as big as the White House. And so music people have somehow managed to make a lot of money. And obviously, Steven Spielberg probably makes $1 million a minute, and I might not be exaggerating there. The higher up you get, the better your deals tend to be. But that's why there are also skyscrapers out in LA. They're full of entertainment attorneys who either establish how much you're going to get paid, or they are after people for collecting. So on that level, it's tough to raise money, even in a place like Wisconsin, which is, people would call it politically a purple state. And the people who began this business were very big gamblers. They left their family businesses on the East Coast. They were in the fur business. They were in department stores. They were in the early Nickelodeons and vaudeville and theater rentals and all that. But it's pretty tough to find a straight-laced businessman who will put money into a movie. And so that's part of the difficulty and the trend of film. So you really are always trying to do a film for as little as possible with the highest quality, because as my theater people told me as I was going to release my last film, it's got to look like a Hollywood film. It's got to sound like a Hollywood film. So you got to shoot in 4K at least. And you've got to have a great sound finish. 7.1 or 5.1 is still acceptable, and so forth. So the future is also still on the story. How good of a story is it? It can be.
So what's the favorite movie you've worked on?
Oh my gosh! Well, I have a number of ways to answer that. The most incredible film was my first one, because here I was 21, 22, and my writing partner and I were just out of film school. And a studio had read a script that we had written and wanted to do it, but instead when they had a guy who was hired to do a 6-picture deal, and he wasn't a great writer. In fact, I don't think he had more than a high. I don't know if he graduated from high school, so he wasn't much of a writer. They said, hire these two guys, and so I suddenly am writing a film for an Academy Award winning actor, a Western, and it was called Gray Eagle, and we shot it up in Helena, Montana, and there were a lot of famous people in the movie, and suddenly I'm on this set, and that's a favorite. It played in my hometown of Appleton, Wisconsin. Actually, I'm from Wausau, but Appleton is where I moved with my family. It was held over at the Viking Theater, and so that was really a great experience. And right out of the gates, hey, what's so hard about this type of an experience, right? And then working on the movies at 20th Century Fox, particularly Hot Shots, with the Jim Abrams, who was one of the guys behind the movie Airplane. That was just nonstop fun. Everything, every decision that was made on that film was, how silly can we get? How funny can it be? And Jim Abrams and Pat Proft, who is an executive producer behind a lot of these films, including The Naked Gun and all that, they were just going to the studio and driving on the lot and having the gate open and, eating at the commissary, and everybody surrounding you is trying to make a serious film. And these guys are just goofing off, and it was so much fun. And so that was a very rich slice of my life.
So going from those kind of films, what motivated you to get into some faith-based films?
Well, I mean, part of it was that I had a dip in my career, and everybody is going to have that. And what happened with me was I had a business partner early on in that miniatures and special effects and shooting regular films, and very energetic, wonderful guy in many respects. But he always made the claim that he was the director. Okay, Michael, you can do anything you want, write, produce, be a cameraman, be a businessman. You run the books for the company, you invoice the studios, you interface with the producers, but I'm the director. And I said, well, fine. And then one day, somebody approached me to write a movie, a teenage comedy type film, and they didn't have enough money to pay for I'm talking about hardly any money. And I said, they said, why don't we make you one of the producers as well? And I said to myself, I picture myself in jail with these guys wearing striped suits and in handcuffs and shackles, because I don't know if they were the best, straight up and up businessmen. I said, well, what about if I direct? And they said, yeah, you can direct. So that's how I became a director. It was always my goal, of course, but I have to state that up front. But when my other partner found out about that, I think this story will appeal to your business audience as well. He came over to my house while I was in Arizona directing, and he took out the computer, the files, and he commenced legal action to cut me out of the company when I was a 50% owner. And so we had that whole episode. And so I went from making $30,000 a month. It was a bad month if we made 25,000, and this was in the 80s. And I had this house in the Hollywood Hills, and suddenly my income went to zero. And I just, in order to just reorient myself, I found a church, started going there. It was a big old brick church in the Hollywood Hills, and a lot of actual other entertainment people went there and still go there. I could mention names and it'd blow you away. But, Scott Derrickson goes there. He directed Doctor Strange. I don't know if he still goes there. Wim Wenders, who did Wings of Desire, was there. Bono, when he would come to town, of U2 would go. So it was that kind of church. So with a ton of entertainment type people, but it was also very rooted spiritually, and it helped get me back to some sort of perspective on my life. Well, when I didn't have anything to do, there was a street mission down in on Hollywood Boulevard, just off of Hollywood on Cherokee, in the middle of nightclub district. And I didn't realize that there were a ton of homeless teenage runaways at the time. And there might still be. I know that the homeless population of LA has burgeoned, and it's up about 60,000 now, and it's an epidemic. And literally there's an epidemic too of the plague. And it's just crazy. So I found this young couple who were doing this rescue of these mission, this night mission type thing. And they wanted me to make a commercial for them to run on TV as a public service announcement. So next thing you know, I'm directing a commercial on Hollywood Boulevard. I got cameras from one company, free film from another company. Universal agreed to, develop the film through Technicolor. I was able to draw on all my old resources. And some people were scouting a film about homelessness. And it was the Billy Graham people. And they said, hey, would you consider directing this film? I said, well, sure. And so that I did a film written by Mark Jonathan Harris, who was at the time the head of the film department at USC. And of course, I'm a UCLA Bruin, so we're supposed to be bitter enemies. So I did this film called Come the Morning, and Mark not only wasn't a Christian, he had studied to be a rabbinical student. But he looked at this film from the perspective of Billy Graham, what the Billy Graham people wanted to have in it. And it was really a neat film. Now, Mark went on to win Academy Awards for Kinder Transport was one about all the kids that were taken out of Germany before the Nazis got a good foothold. And then he also did one on the founding of Israel, and the amount of time it took to get the Jewish people out of the concentration camps once they were liberated to Israel. It took 2 or 3 years. It was another exodus, and I think that was called The Long Journey Home, something like that. So he's got a couple of gold statues in his house in L.A. So I was able to work with him and a producer named John Shepard, who just had that film come out about Emmanuel, about the church shootings. That came out earlier this month. Actually in June.
Right.
There was a lot of talent on that film, and the cameraman was great, and the composer and the talent. In fact, Mariska Hargitay was in the film. Then she goes on to become, one of those Law and Order shows for a million years. So it was a lot of fun, and that was that led to other films, and we started using A-list actors, and I got to meet and do a documentary on Lou Zamperini, who was in the book Unbroken, and the feature film came out. I didn't have anything to do with the feature film, but that was Angelina Jolie directed that. But so I got to know Lou quite well, and he was at my wedding, as a matter of fact. I had a very amazing journey in the faith-based world, and later on, I did these films for a guy named Chuck Colson, most famously Nixon's Hatchet Man, and Born Again, and then he went to prison for having the files of 2 private citizens in the White House, and that's against the law. And people thought he was Deep Throat and Watergate, but he wasn't. But I did many videos for him on reformed lives, people in prison who got out and never went back and whose lives were changed. So it was quite a journey, and it certainly is a part of my life.
So what are some of the big life lessons you've learned over your years of making movies?
Probably an early one that stuck with me is that the first summer out of college, I didn't really have anything going on, and I tried to get into the world of advertising. And so one of my friend's dads was really either the head guy or the second guy in charge of an ad agency on Wilshire Boulevard. And this was right out of the Mad Men series. I mean, you're talking about martini lunches and cocktails at 4:00, and you shouldn't be driving home at 4:30. And these were big, huge accounts. And this guy said to me early on, you should learn how to do everything, because one day you're going to have to fire somebody or they're not going to show up, and you're going to have to do that. So I did, over the next few years, learn how to do practically every position on a movie set, including budgeting for wardrobe changes, how many scenes in the movie called for different wardrobe, sitting in on casting sessions, everything. Now, the only one mystery is nobody knows how to do sound. I couldn't do sound to save my life, but so that was one of the first lessons is don't be afraid to try something new, and don't be afraid to, if it's a non-union film, don't be afraid to plug in a light or to move a light, or, if something needs to be done to help move the pace along, but don't take yourself away from your primary job either. Don't be distracted to where you're not doing the main reason you were hired. So that's one life lesson. The other is that really a lot of it does depend on you. You can have the luxury of, there's several director-producer relationships in Hollywood. Wherever you had a Mel Gibson film, you had a competent, terrific producer behind him with Steve McAveety. Whenever Mel Gibson, oh my gosh, there's just Ron Howard has Brian Grazer and Todd Hollowell behind him. They're just Steven Spielberg tends to have very similar producers. My good friend from UCLA, who was in the same fraternity house, Tim Moore, has produced the last 12 Clint Eastwood films. And so you always get, you build a team. Mike Nichols, who I greatly admire as a director, had the same crew and producers for like 30 years, I think. And so that's part of a winning formula, and treating people well, no matter what crew position they're in. The Teamsters, the grips, everything. Everybody's working at always listen to suggestions, but not to the point where you're still not in the position to make the final decision. You never want somebody taking over the set. Well, I kind of experienced it on one film where one crew member thought that they knew it all. And so I came up with this expression: when you hire a genius, that makes you an idiot. So as long as when you hire a genius to help you, you want to make sure that you can still maintain the fact that you're in charge and you're the creative vision and whatever. But yeah, it's a very collaborative art.
So building those relationships is really important, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And if somebody calls me and asks me what experience I had with another person, a crew member or an actor or whatever, I just simply say, it was fantastic. And then if they say, will you work with them again? I'll either say yes or no. And that really says it all. Always have good people around you, people in your corner. My wife is phenomenal for a number of reasons. People at getting an Academy Award always thank their spouses and significant others. Bottom line there is that during thin times, that helps with the cash flow, that somebody else's has an income. And you can afford to take some, boutique projects that wouldn't pay you what you normally would get for something a bit larger. But my wife also reads material. She's a filter. She can point out where I got lazy in my thinking, or where something could be better, or are you sure about this yet? That type of thing. So she's kind of the first line of defense. And so, yeah.
I always say that my wife is the one who greenlights my project.
Oh, that's funny. I like that. I mean,
because she's really she has a good sense for people and can read people very well, and I don't really work on a project really without her blessing, especially a project that's going to take me away, that's going to cause me to be gone for days or weeks at a time. And I really depend on her because she has to keep the home front going. And even though our kids are gone now, makes it a little bit easier, but she's still, like my last project, Heroine's Grip. We kind of talked about it for several months. And then one day she heard our governor speaking about this issue about the opioid crisis. And she was like, she leaned over to me and she said, "You better make this film."
Yeah.
So when she does that, then I'm off to the races.
Fantastic. Yeah. So, and I have a circle of advisors and or representatives, you might say. And I was told very early on not to get an agent. It's because they said with a director, you're going to find the work yourself, and then you have to pay somebody 10%. So not that I wouldn't love to have an agent who was really fighting for me, but and I do have a couple that if it came down to this, if Universal Studios called later today and said, "All right, Michael, they insist that you do this. Who's your agent?" I have several. I have several I could call on, and they would take 10%. So, yeah.
Kind of wrapping up here. When the movie about your life is made, what will the log line be?
Oh my gosh. I kind of like that. There's a I believe it's referring to Mitch McConnell talking about Elizabeth Warren. I'm not sure, but he said she persisted. I don't know if it was a Hillary or a comment about some woman politician, and Mitch McConnell said she persisted. And that probably is mine. I persisted, or I survived. There are so many things that can draw you away from this business during downtimes where you can start managing a restaurant. I mean, I came dangerously close to becoming a maitre d' at a restaurant in West Los Angeles. And fortunately, when I walked in, they said, "Oh, you have to cut your beard." And I went, "Nah, the beard is me." And now, of course, every maitre d' on the planet has a beard. But back in the day, that was not something that they liked. Maybe they had an entire restaurant full of people that they didn't want to have beards. But
so you can say your beard saved your career. Huh?
Well, it's a weird thing that when I was getting into the business, you had to look older. People weren't going to hire you right away based on your youth. And now there's a premium on youth, or at least it seems to be. And every now and then you see a guy over 60 winning an Academy Award. I told you so. And he's waving the statue in the air. The beard made me look a little more mature. I started growing it at a toga party at UCLA. and then one day, 4th of July, I was home in Wisconsin with my nieces. They said, "Hey, Uncle Michael, can we shave off your beard?" And I said, "Yeah." We did it on video, and it was fun. I mean, I'm glad the blades were a little bit on the dull side. But when I shaved my beard, I gained 10 years back. I suddenly looked a lot younger, and my skin was better. So, yeah. Anyway, I still feel like I'm at the midpoint of my career. I still have many films to go. A lot of ideas come to me, and I have a few of my own.
Thanks, Michael, for taking time to talk with me. I really appreciate it. It's fun to hear the stories from the inside of Hollywood and how things are done there. So thanks for your work, and thanks for taking time to talk to me here on the My Story Podcast. Next week on the My Story Podcast, we'll hear an interview with Jen Preisendance. She's an author, a recovery advocate, and she talks about her journey from being abused as a little girl to being homeless on the streets of LA and eating out of dumpsters while she was in the depth of her addiction to drugs and alcohol. And she'll talk about her journey to recovery. She has an amazing story. You won't want to miss it. That's next week on the My Story Podcast. The music on today's show is from my friend Drew Davidson. You can get all of his music on iTunes or Spotify or at drewdavidson.com. Last, be sure to subscribe to the show so you won't miss an episode. And if you have an idea for an interview you'd like to hear, send me a message and I'll see what I can do. Thanks so much for listening. I'll talk to you again next week on the My Story Podcast.